Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Tennis Files podcast. I'm here with my friend Jonas Eriksson. Jonas, it's really a pleasure to connect with you, as I was mentioning before I hit the record button, because I've seen so many of your videos. Just been, searching for the right racket and strings, and you're one of the first people that I watch. So it's really cool to see you grow. And I also love reading your articles as well. So I've read a lot of them too. So Jonas, thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to be on the other side of a podcast. So I do enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. People should also check out your podcast on YouTube. I've seen some nice ones there as well. I think you've done what, like 60 of them so far ish, or something
Yeah,
like
I wish I knew. I mean, it's maybe
that.
closer to 100. I don't know, but it's like
Oh,
it goes in spurts. But I haven't been as prolific as you, so it's like a thing that if you get some good guests, you keep on going. But then sometimes you're like, oh, you get pressed for time, and then you're like, oh shit, I have to find new guests. So
yeah,
yes,
man, it's not easy, as you know. So, but yeah, again, really great to have you here. To just talk tennis rackets, strings, and other equipment. Perhaps if we have time, we'll see. But I do find it interesting to see like the journey, the racket journey of folks on occasion when they're equipment experts like yourself. So I was curious, like what rackets you use, like from the junior days. Did you use some sort of like stainless steel or metal frame, or did you use throughout the years?
yeah, I'm not that old, but I'm quite old. But it's no, I used like my first proper racket was a Wilson 6195. That's still
Nice.
around. Like you can still buy it, but in different iterations over the years, right? But it was the red and white one. I think Federer made it more famous with his Pro Staff 90. That's kind of like this polka dot kind of paint job, right? And
Yeah.
that's a great one. There's plenty of pros still using this mold today. I think Evans is using that exact frame. Kind of the layup is what's inside the racket. The mold is the structure of the racket. And so
Mm,
there's several pros using that, but with different cosmetics on them, right?
I see. I see. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I have the first racket I remember that I was successful with was the hammer, I think 6.2, like the skunk that yeah, Martin used, Todd Martin, and was it Davenport as well? So that's pretty nice. But cool, awesome. And I do want this podcast to be very helpful for folks in terms of like finding the right racket. And so we're going to get into that first, I think. So like what is your process, Jonas, of from step zero, I guess, or whatever, step one, like what is the first step you do to like figure out the right racket for you, and then obviously you can go on to the other steps.
Yeah, I think you have to start always looking at yourself, like figuring out like who you are, what you do well, what you do less well, where your strengths and where your weaknesses are. Like if you have a problem in overhitting, or if you're more like you can't get enough power on your shots, you usually get like pulled back and have to always defend. So
Yeah.
you have to take a pretty strong look at yourself in the mirror to find a good racket. I always recommend people to record themselves. I've been doing it for many years through my YouTube channel and stuff. It's sometimes gruesome watching, and you're not going to like what you see, but it's also a way to improve, not only with the racket, but also kind of in your technique and your movement, and you're seeing what's going wrong. If your opponent allows, maybe you play like tournament or league matches, you can record yourself in the match. And then you can look back and say, oh, what was I doing at like 30, 40, in 3 service games, I made the same mistake, and so on. So kind of based on your level, of course, like you shouldn't use too much of an advanced racket, but you also have to ask yourself, I think, first of all, like, why do you play tennis? So if you play tennis to win matches, to be competitive and to improve, the racket should ideally help you a bit, like unless you're a pro that needs ultimate control and you need to play with a pretty heavy frame. I think a
Mm.
lot of players that play tennis for a while, but they're not on like such a high level, I think they're using quite difficult rackets. So then modern rackets, 100 square inch or even larger head sizes is the way to go, but if you're an advanced player that require control and feel, then it's more of a difficult process to get like you accustomed to the feel. Because what we talked about before we started recording as well is like, if you have a racket you really like and you like the feel of it, you like how it impacts the ball and everything, it's quite tough even with an updated model to find that exact thing you're looking for. So sometimes it's tough to make a change, and you see that with rec players, you see that with pros. So but I think you start looking at yourself. Do I need more power? Go bigger head size. Go for something more forgiving. Or do you really like the old school, more control rackets? Then there's definitely lots of choose from there. So the problem is obviously the choice in the marketplace, because whatever player you are, you're going to have a jungle to wade through in terms of all the types of rackets you like, or want to get trying.
Freaking jungle, man. I've gone through I think like 12 so far and haven't decided yet. But yeah, a lot of follow-ups from that. Great info, Jonas. I mean, the first one, which one should I pick? Probably let's go with you mentioned the recording. So just a quick like detour, I guess. Like that is so important, and I record myself, and I, like you said, I find things that I didn't think was I do incorrectly, and it's so insightful. What do you use to record?
I just use my iPhone. Like I have two iPhones. I have one for phone calls and one for like tennis recording. So
Nice,
it's
nice.
been working well. I think you can be very picky and use like a 4K camera and stuff. I've tried it in the past, but it's also if the ball hits it or it falls because of the windy conditions or something, it's going to be more expensive and it's going to break easier than an iPhone. An iPhone can actually take a fall, so
It's true.
that also helps, and it records awesome quality, and you can use it to
Yeah.
call. So there's a lot of things that is good there. But you can use a GoPro as well. I probably there's a bit cheaper alternative, or whatever smartphone that has recording.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to edit your videos, you can use kind of Swing Vision, which is a tool that kind of cuts out. I mean, it does many things. You can analyze like your speed and stuff, but it cuts out the dead time. So you don't have to sit there, and if you play a match, you like have to actually edit out all the walking and picking up the balls and swearing or whatever is happening in between the points. So there are things that you can make it pretty easy. So you always make sure to record your sessions, and I think I can really recommend that to anyone, really.
Yeah, 100% love that. And then like to prop your phone up, are you using like some sort of tripod or something that attached to the fence or something?
Yeah, you can use like a fence mount, depending if there's a fence there. I guess in the US, there's a lot of like always a fence around the tennis court. I've lived in Malta in south of Europe, and now I live in Spain, south of Spain, and
Hmm.
it's not always like a proper fence where you can actually mount
Uh,
it on the fence. So then I always bring a tripod and get a semi-sturdy one. I mean, you can get a cheap like Amazon Basics one, which I have.
sure. I have two.
That's easy to pack in the bag. You just put it up. People will ask you why you're filming, but that's a part of the game. You always get that, like,
Yeah.
oh, what are you filming? What are you doing? And so it's you're gonna get that question, but otherwise, it's great way to record.
Yeah, awesome, Jonas. And then before I ask you about this, like the next step, you did mention, that a lot of people are using rackets that are too heavy for them. You're just like a 4-0 and you're using the Federer heaviest one or whatever frame. So yeah, what are some of the biggest racket mistakes that like you're looking around and seeing people make?
Yeah, I think it's partly using a racket that's too demanding. Like and also I
Yeah.
see people who they know maybe that if you add lead tape, like weight, it could be tungsten tape or lead tape to a racket,
Okay.
it's gonna increase power and stability. But what happens is that they overdo it. So you have a lead tape slapped all over the racket, and it's like too heavy, and it might impact your swing, and then it's gonna hurt your elbow. So I mean, like, you need to find a racket that helps you hit the sweet spot as often as possible, especially if you have elbow issues. So I think a lot of players they maybe hit sometimes outside or too frequently outside, and that's really where the problem with the elbow and stuff happens, because then you have a lot of vibrations going down to your arm. So the weight, I see people using too heavy rackets. In some cases, there can be also too light, that you're never
Mm,
progressing up to a slightly heavier racket. You're using maybe 270 grams, which is kind of like the ultra light racket type, and you have no stability, no power really, and no stability on the ball, and that can also be bad for your game, right? So the weight is something I see quite a lot, that people use the wrong weight. Then the second one, which is more related to strings, is that they string the racket too high. So
mm,
old tensions like from the 90s used to be that everybody played with like a softer string, multi-filament or gut, and they know that to get control with that, you need to string like 60 pounds, 62 pounds, or even more. And in this case, when you're using now modern polyester strings, which has a lot
mhm.
more give and a lot more resilience, you can go down really low. You can go down to 25 pounds, as Manarino, one of the videos I made there, got pretty interesting, because he plays with such a low tension. That's crazy. You get a lot of trampoline from the string bed, and if you can control it, it's great, but it's going to be tough. But if you're playing with 45 pounds, for example, that's still low, and gives you a bit more bigger sweet spot, bit more power, bit more depth on your shots. and is a bit more forgiving on the arm as well. So I think a lot of players, they stick to that thought that they need to string very, very high tensions to get control. While I don't think that's always the best idea. You're seeing it with the pros; they're definitely going down. So I think also club level players should consider that, going down in tension.
Yeah, no, it's such great advice. Yeah, I started with like the 62 or so. I remember back in the day when I was using synthetic gut. And then, as I got to poly, then I started with like maybe 55, 54. Now I'm down to like 50. So it definitely, it's helped to lower the tension and get more out of the string there, especially with the poly. So Jonas, so we've established what you've established. The first step is of finding a racket is to like really figure yourself out, record yourself and see like what might I need, what's my game like. So then once we've thought all this out, maybe we've written it down or thought about it, like what's the next step that we should take?
Yeah, so then hopefully you have an idea of who you are. So like, okay, the level. Obviously, you should go and read articles on Tennisnerd or other websites reviewing rackets. That's there are many out there now, many reviewers testing rackets. But there should be some kind of range. Like, so if like most players can play with 100 square inch racket. So there are mainly two popular head sizes today. It's like 98, which is the more control group. There are smaller ones still, like 95, but they're getting rarer and rarer. And for most people, nothing even to consider. So if you're a pretty advanced player or you like to go for control, no matter what your level, the 98 is the way to go, And but then with 100, it's such a wide variety. So there are rackets that fall in between that most players can use, like a Speed, for example, or a Blade 100. Those kind of rackets that it's not too powerful, not too spin oriented, where the ball just kicks up or has a lot of like launch on your shots. So you don't need to really go crazy and like try everything. But if you identify, for example, okay, I should probably play with a somewhat forgiving racket, but I don't want it too powerful, then you can go to your favorite retailer or your shop or whatever and hopefully get a demo, because everybody needs to try the racket. I really suggest you should, if you can, get 4 rackets from a demo program, Tennis Warehouse, whatever, and try them out, because otherwise it can be like you buy something and you're like, okay, this does not feel right. Depends a bit of how picky you are, but for some it might be like lead to this endless search, a complete jungle where you're like, you're never happy, because you try too much, and that's where you see a lot.
Yeah, right here, this guy. Yeah, no, that's great stuff. So in terms of the demoing now, so like, sorry for the beeps. So we've gotten our 3 or 4 demos. I think Tennis Warehouse might be 3, but yeah, whatever. So then we have the demos, and then what should we do now? Because like this is one step like where I have effed up before, where like I just took the rackets like as is and just like used them, and then then the next time I did, I said, wait a minute, maybe I should be thinking about like replacing the strings, like all the same strings and tension, whatnot. So like how should we do our best practices for demoing?
Yeah, that's a good point, because like I think some demo programs, maybe it's not long enough, so you can't restring, but ideally you should test all rackets with the same string. So when I test rackets, since I've been testing hundreds and hundreds of rackets and strings, but I have maybe a few different strings that I know exactly how they will play in a certain racket. So I like your arms and muscle memory and the sensations are built up. But for general testing purposes, it's good to have the same setup, so that it's not the string that is like bad, or you're not used to it, or it's screwing something up, because the string is really half the racket, at least in terms of feel, performance, control, power. So if you have an old string, the racket might feel like a rocket launcher because it lost tension. Or if you have a string you're not enjoying, it might be too stiff, then the racket feels stiff because the string is very stiff. So it's better to just have your string set up if you have time to do it. Maybe if you string yourself, or if you have a stringer that can say, hey, I want Hyper-G or whatever, 50 pounds on all these or 3 rackets. Then you bring them to the court. Then I always urge people to only do 5 minutes per racket, because what I see a lot is like, you pick it up, you play to hit 5 shots, you're like, no, I can't play with this. This is shit. This is crap racket. And you need to actually, however painful, at least get an hour of hitting in. Preferably like maybe you do half an hour, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not a lot, but at least it gives you something. And then you do a half an hour the next day or the next time you play, because you might have a bad day, and then the racket is like, oh, everything is shit, you know. But then the next day you have a great day. So you need to kind of
Right.
evaluate also, how am I feeling? Is this kind of a, am I being somewhat objective here, or is it a very subjective reasoning, you know, behind it? So I think it's as, try to eliminate as many variables as possible and give the racket time, because the problem with the demo period of 1 week is that sometimes it takes, you know, a month to get used to a racket. So you need to have a little bit of like, I really like this racket, but I'm not playing perfectly with it, or I'm not like, you know, perfectly in tune with it yet. Give it time, because it takes time to build up the muscle memory where you're connected to the racket. Sometimes you need to change the string, lower the tension, but usually you need that feeling to make a commitment to it, of like, okay, I like this. You know, if you don't have that feeling that you like it after half an hour, most likely you're not going to like it after 5 hours, I would say.
Yeah.
So there's so many rackets, you want that first feeling of like, wow, I like this, and then you see after that.
Nice. With demo programs, I know now you know you get a lot of hookups. I imagine, like, you know, you do such a great job and brands want to work with you. But like for the demo programs, like, do you know, do they allow extensions? You know, like if you only have a week with 3 rackets, like, can you just say, hey, I'll extend it or something like that?
I think so. Sometimes, yeah. I think it
Okay.
depends maybe on the, or how, you know, heavy the demand is for a certain model. I mean, it depends, but that could be a way to go if you really like. Okay, I want to try this. One way I built up over time so many hours with different rackets is like I've been buying lightly used rackets, testing them for as long as required, and then selling them again. I mean, it's a hassle. You have to actually like maybe go to the post office if you buy one like on eBay or similar service. You try it, but then you have time with it, and you focus on the racket. Oh, it's not for me. Then you can sell it, and you're most likely not going to lose a lot of money, right? Like it's used rackets, lightly used rackets. They are, you know, maybe $100, $120. If it's in very good condition, it's not like a really old racket. Sometimes you're luckier to have it cheaper. You know, it could be a little bit more, but then you can sell it for 10% lower, or maybe the same, or maybe even higher if you're a good business guy, you know? So I would say that's been my way of just testing so much. It's like, okay, I buy these 3 used, sometimes cheap rackets, and then I, you know, sell them on, or it's trade sometimes. You know, I have been trading a lot of rackets. Like, oh, I didn't like this one. Maybe you will like this, you know? So that's a way to actually test without having the kind of restrictions of the demo.
Jonas, I think you should bundle your rackets with a free racket analysis and then 2x price. Boom.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Well, you could try. But yeah, that reminds me, you know, of this one time. Yeah, you know, demoing it properly, you said, and giving it enough time at least. You like, I remember one of the stupidest demos I ever did was shout out to my friend Luis. He has a V Core. And like in the middle of like a doubles practice match, like I was like, "Oh, Luis, let me use your V Core like just for a game or two." And then he had lead tape on it too, and like different strings and tension. I was like, "This is the worst racket I've ever played with," you know. But then months later, I tried the V Core again, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is like way better," you know. Just, I mean, it was stupid, but just, you know, things like that. People make mistakes sometimes with these rackets, Jonas. Once so you're demoing, right? You know, you connect with a few rackets maybe, and then like, how do you narrow it down then to the one?
Yeah, that's a tough one. But like, let's say you like 2 rackets, just for
Yeah,
argument's sake, you know, and
yeah,
then maybe you, I mean, if you have money, you can buy them both and then sell the one you don't like, so you have more time.
right.
You know, maybe you get an extension. I always recommend to play it in some kind of match format. Like if you're a competitive player, hopefully,
Yeah.
I mean, most tennis players are. They like to play either with against friends. Maybe they have a league. Maybe they have a club matches going, or even tournaments. You know, you need to test the racket also in competitive setting. That might settle the question of whether it's racket A or B, because in competitive settings, as we all know, we get tenser, we tense up, we play poorly or better depending on your mental state, you know, your psyche. Maybe you're like you know, a guy who just, or girl who performs really really well in match situations, but for a lot of tennis players it's the opposite. So you break down, your technique starts going, you're tight, and then the racket will tell you a lot. Like, you can play with a racket in practice that feels like $1,000,000. You're like, I can't miss with this racket, it's like the best racket ever. You go play a match the next day, suddenly, oh, it's too heavy, I can't move it, and
Yeah.
I'm 10, you know. So we've all been through that, I think, and that's where you have to get some information and see, okay, do I need, and you have to ask yourself, like, is this, you know, is this too heavy for me? Why am I late? Is it because I'm so nervous and not moving, or is it because I'm using too much of a racket? So I might actually be able to get some more balls back or get some more balls, back defensively in play if the racket helps me a bit more, right? So I think that
Yeah.
match statement is the one where you will feel, okay, I'm winning more with this racket. So then racket B, for example. So that's why I'm going to go with it, because that's maybe what's most important to you, that you play your best tennis and you win some free points, for example.
Yeah, I love that piece of advice, Jonas. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember which frame it was that I was testing, and like in practice, just hitting from the baseline, like felt amazing. I was taking big cuts, but then, when I played a set, then kind of like running for balls, running forehands, especially. Like I like to use a buggy whip a lot of times. I hit with a lot of spin and defense, and I just wasn't able to like whip it as much. So like, it's little things like that is very important to figure out for yourself. Um, so you mentioned something very interesting and like that I've been intimidated by personally. But I have a friend, shout out to Chris. But he's like the master, besides you, of like, buying rackets and then like testing them and then selling them. He's hundreds of times he's done this, but maybe thousands. But what do you what are some any other tips in terms of like platform? Like, what's the easiest way? Like, do you sell on a particular platform that makes it super easy to do, or you just use many different ones?
I've used everything pretty much. Like there was a site called String Forum. I think it's still around, but it's like really
Oh yeah.
old. So maybe you get like a security error because it's not HTTPS. That stuff like that. I think the last time I checked it out. So that
Yeah.
was a forum where you could sell and buy and trade. I set up a Facebook group just for that. So that people could like
Awesome.
it's 25,000 people something, and that's where people list a lot of rackets. I haven't bought anything from there myself, but I see a lot of buys and trades, and people are
Cool.
generally pretty honest. I mean, you have to always check, so it's not like some counterfeit products or something, but it's quite rare. Like these people are tennis nerds that buy a bunch of rackets, trade, sell, then buy another bunch of rackets. It's a pretty harmless hobby, but it's easy to get it stuck into this. Whether you're a collector or you just love to find, because it's an eternal quest for that racket. Like you rarely will find the holy grail for your game. You will just keep searching because it's fun as well. So it's a part
Yeah.
of the tennis. Like my friend Henrik, who also tests rackets for the Swedish Tennis Magazine, he says like sometimes it's not even fun to play or as much fun if I don't have something new to play with, right? Like he brings review rackets, he buys something on a forum, it's classic, right? So that's what I've been doing, using forums, eBay. Like they're in every country, usually there are different buy and sell sites you can use. So like I even gone to like Netherlands, bought like from Marktplaats, which is like the Dutch. I'm not Dutch, I don't speak Dutch, but I bought I found a racket there, and then you buy it. Like Italian sites, I've been everywhere, right? So
Oh my gosh.
you can definitely find, if there's a racket out there, you will find it. And now that I live in Spain, there's a Spanish
Wow.
counterpart to that, so I found some rackets there. So yeah, there's
Dang.
rackets out there online. You will be able to find them if you really want one. So
Nice. Yeah. Racketaholics. You need to set up an AA group for that.
yeah.
And also, yeah, feel free. Like, if you want to send me that Facebook racket group that you configured, I can put it in the show notes page. People can check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Oh, and then with the counterfeit situation, you did say it's rare, but I was just curious because, like, I love watches, for example, but like I've been kind of a little afraid to get them like secondhand just because of counterfeit issue. But like, what have you ever run into that? And then like any ways to like protect against like to make sure it's not a counterfeit?
It's a tough one. I have never personally had it, or experienced it, but I've had people reach out to me and say, "Hey, something looks off here," and
Mm.
there are a few, I'm not a super expert, but there's a few telltale signs, like anything visual, like does the logo look off? Like, is this the Wilson logo? I mean, it says Nilsson, you shouldn't buy it.
Mm.
Small things with the font, if you are aware of what you're buying. So you can be a little bit skeptical. I've never
Mm.
experienced it, as I said, over hundreds and hundreds of racket purchases, but I've gotten like emails and messages like, yeah, do you think this is legit? And there's been a few times I've said like, this looks a bit off. There's something with the Babula logo or
Yeah.
something that's a bit dodgy, right? So you have to be a little bit cautious,
Yeah.
and there could be like, even when you buy things online, maybe have a few conversations so you can trust the guy. Maybe this is a reputable seller. Sometimes they have reviews, like eBay. I think they have reviews for the seller. That makes it
Mm.
easier.
Yeah.
If it's someone complete stranger, it's good to actually get a feel for if you can trust this person. Sadly, like that's how it is, right? So otherwise, maybe there's no rackets showing up, or you know how it is. So you have to be a little bit. You don't have to be super suspicious, but you know, think it through and try to get a feel for what you're buying, right?
Great stuff, Jonas. Hey, yeah, just on the buying part of it, then, and you did mention actually, some tips and whatnot, like, but yeah, just any other like when you're buying a racket, like I don't know, should you look into buying like the previous version if there's not much of a change, and then also like as far as platforms, like to get like you mentioned sometimes you just prefer to get it like lightly used or sometimes new, like I don't know, just any thoughts on that buying part?
If you want to save money and you're not ultra picky, I would go for the previous model. Because I mean, when it's time for a release of a new line, and the racket companies are in more hurry now, like you need more products on the market,
Yeah.
the times in between updates are
Hmm.
shorter, and the update tends, and it's not always the case, but tends to be small. So it's like not as huge, significant change to the structure of the racket. It's maybe some change to the layup where they've added some foam, or it is small things generally, right? And
Yeah.
then you can get the previous outgoing model for like half price. So that's where you can do some bargains. So if you know, usually models have 2 years. I mean, Head does 2 years. I think Wilson sometimes 2 or 3, depending on the model. Babala, they're a bit takes a bit more time. Babala, for some reason, they usually wait like 3 or even more. Like for example, we have a new Pure Strike coming year here, 2024, and the
Sweet.
old Pure Strike that's been around now since 2019. So this is a long one for rackets. So I think soon you will be able to get really good deals on the Pure Strike, the outgoing one, for example. So that's a way to save money. For very, very picky people, sometimes the new version is good enough to spend the extra money. Like there's enough of an update. That's why you might need to check out reviews and stuff, you know. And I usually keep like an extra version of the old model or whatever if I can, if I don't
Yeah,
remember
to
exactly how it
test.
plays, to be able to compare and see, okay, is this going to be something that an average player, I mean, I might feel it, but if I test like hundreds of rackets, then it's a bit different than if someone just, oh, I don't feel anything, you know. So
Yeah.
that's a good way to not have to spend so much money, because I know now rackets are very expensive. Like they really upped the price on rackets now last year. So you would want to find some bargain deal, especially if you want to buy more than one. Maybe you want 3 ones, so you have two freshly strung or whatever. If you're a competitive player, then it's gonna add up the money, right? So
Yeah, definitely. I think I saw the Pure Aero at one point was like 300 if I'm not mistaken. And I was
Mhm.
like, wow, this is I've never seen this price before. But that is what it excuse me, it is what it is. But Jonas, this could be a very sensitive piece of information that maybe you don't want to give away, but how many rackets do you have right now?
No, not sensitive at all. I had like a while ago, I had like 100. It's been
Okay.
fluctuating, of course. I sell a bunch to my like
Yeah.
Patreons and stuff. I usually have like rackets for
Mm.
sale there, because like
Mm.
I can't keep them all. Like sometimes, I mean, over the years, I've like, oh, I buy this model and then I get bored with it in like 1 week. I'm like, why did I buy this? Like it's stupid, you know. And I still do silly mistakes. Sadly, I'm like, oh, I should switch to this. Let me get 3 of this one on some forum, and then I'm like, I'm using that 2 more weeks, and then no, I'm bored with it. But I have like I think maybe now I have like 70 or 80, maybe something like that. But after
Okay.
selling a bunch, so it's been fluctuating a bit. But it's way too many, That's
Mm.
but I keep key models because I'm reviewing new ones. So for example, this year I know which lines are being overall, which are being updated, and then I have the previous generation, so I can actually string them up the same and compare and say, okay, is this anything? Because I try to be like focused on the consumer. Is it worth for them to pay 300 euros or $300
Yeah.
when the previous model was pretty much the same, and in most cases it's maybe not. So that's really, you have to be very blunt about that, and really compare them.
Yeah, that's why people love your channel, Jonas. I can just imagine you like you're like in the middle of the night, you wake up to go to the bathroom, and you're just like tripping on a racket. You're like, damn it, just with all the
Could happen.
rackets you have. Like, I don't know why, I just visualize that strange mind I have. But now I'm gonna ask you a very selfish question. I'm an only child, so a little bit selfish here. But and I kind of talked to you about this earlier. But so I play with a Pure Aero VS 2017. I think it's like the Pure Storm mold, is it? But yeah, so I've been liking that a lot. and for me, like, it's very important that I have a very spinny racket, one that helps me produce. I mean, obviously you've talked about how like you have to have the technique for it, but it helps accentuate that. And then, like power, like decent amount of power is good, not too much, not too little. But the big thing for me, Jonas, is like I want more stability, because then when I'm playing some of these really good 5.0s and even 5.5s, like when they're like really whacking the ball, like sometimes I feel like I'm not as confident, like, with the connection. Where, for example, I tested a previous generation V Core, and I could just feel that thing like definitely a lot more stable. It's like a thicker frame as well, and then also on the volleys too, it felt more stable. So, I was wondering if you have any thoughts on what racket to use first off, and then I also have some demos coming up that I'll ask you about in a second. But like, any thoughts on like what types of rackets you think I might like for that to transition to?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, like that's the most common thing is that people really like a model. It could either be like outgoing, like you can't find it anymore. Like you have to search forums and eBay. Like, I would usually be able to find it like at some
Mm,
point, even rare models, because I have so many different sources for it and
yeah.
people I know that are in the racket business or whatever. But generally, you might also want to change because maybe, hey, I want a bit more stability, or there's something out there. And when you're talking about the Aero VS, it's kind of like the 98 range. So you're not going full power racket, you're going spin control
Right.
racket. So it's a spin control racket. And there's a bunch on the market, right? So, and
Yeah.
if we take the V Core 98, for example, it's a good option. The new V Core 98 is very flexible. Like it has a lot of like pocketing. You might like
Mm,
that. It's not
okay.
similar to what you are used to, but some people love it and some people don't. That's one of those rackets that has had like a strong update. So the previous
Mm,
2021 one was firmer feeling, a little bit more similar to what you were used to, while this
mm,
one is more flexible, a little bit more dampening overall. So you're not going to feel the
mm,
ball quite as much, but it's also going to feel kind of pillowy. So that you might enjoy. Then the obvious choice is like Aero 98, Alcaraz, Rune, Arthur Fields, so many good players using that. I have many like advanced pros here in south of Spain where I'm playing. Like they bring lots of rackets. They try it. They're like, oh, I love this racket. Like that's one where people go, wow. That's been one where like it's a 98, but it gives you a lot of power, a lot of spin.
mm, mhm.
Feeling is a bit more dampened than in this version than the previous generation. I like it, but there's also several guys I know that like the previous generation. So it's a very much of a matter of taste. But you have to try the new Aero 98 if you're in the search for that type of racket. I think it's a must. So VCore 98, Aero 98, Head Extreme Tour is a bit more control oriented, I would say. So might not give you all the power you need if you're hitting like if you're playing against really strong players. The forgiveness is quite important. Like otherwise, you're not going to get enough on your defensive shots when they start hitting hard, right? So I
Mm,
think that's the stability, the issue. And then obviously you can add weight to it. So trying adding like 2 grams of lead tape, just bumping up the weight a bit, see if that helps when you are getting attacked or you're having like a strong hitter you're playing against.
yeah.
But I would say Aero, V Core, maybe Extreme Tour. Those are like the most popular control spin rackets because you would like a spin racket, of course. But I don't know. Like it depends a little bit on the style. Like for example, some people like the ball to just have a more of a kick upwards.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like you can try a pure strike, for example, where you have a little bit more of a flat trajectory, but it's very stable racket, right? It's very
Mm,
stable red frame. So those are some good options that I really thought like the Aero 98 very good update. I even like me. I'm a more of a flat hitting player. I like really low powered frames.
mhm.
But I've been flirting with the Aero 100 this year because it's a racket I thought was very good, and they made the
Yeah,
string pattern denser. So actually, the
they did.
control aspect is much better than the previous generation. So in this case, I thought it was for me a clear improvement, but not for everyone.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jonas. Yeah, the Pure Aero 100 I really was very impressed by like the power but control, like especially on the returns. Like I was really hammering the returns. Like I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But yeah, yeah, those are some great shout outs. Some of them I've tried and like just not quite there maybe, but I might have to retry some of them. I've been retrying things lately again, but yeah, I mean, some other ones I was thinking of, and actually, I have a Yonex Percept 100 coming in. I thought that might be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to try a Head Speed MP, but they didn't have that in stock at the moment. So I don't know. Those. What do you think of those choices? You think those are like these could be okay, maybe.
Definitely worth a try, because those fall
Yeah.
more in the in between. They're like not in the spin category anymore. Doesn't mean that you
Okay.
won't get spin with them, but
Okay.
they're not like pure drive power or
Yeah.
e-stone power. So it's quite an interesting category that's growing, where you have the forgiveness of 100 square inch in the Percept case, but it is not as stiff, as powerful. It has a little bit more feel to it. I really like the
Mm.
Percept 100. I think you'll enjoy that one. It also feels like it's a little bit faster through the air than maybe some other 100 square inch rackets. I don't know exactly know
Mm.
why. I mean, the beam width is not as thick as you go with
Ah.
an Aero, for example. Same for the speed. The beam is 23 millimeter instead of like a 26. So if you go for a power racket, a lot of them are 26 millimeters. That's a very thick beam. Some players can't play with
Yeah,
that.
it's
They don't
thick.
like that at all. Some
Yeah.
players feel like, yeah, they feel more like it's more stable and stuff like that. So
Mm.
it depends a little bit on the taste. But the speed is something I think most people should try, just to kind of clear their head, because it's like a bestseller for a reason. It has such a broad audience.
Mm.
I would not use it's not for me, but it's like a lot of people like it. It's one of those rackets you see all over and all over again. So worth testing those and see if that could work.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jonas. And yeah, I mean, one that I was like really wanted to fall in love with, but again, like didn't quite get there, was the Solinco Whiteout 98, the 16 by 19. Like I did like it. I felt like it was like pretty whippy, but I felt like maybe I wasn't getting quite as much power, like slightly not enough power that I would normally want to get. But have you? I mean, you've obviously tried that out. Did you gel with that one?
I did like it. I mean, since I test everything, I get very picky, right? So
Yeah.
that's my problem. I have to kind of dial my own picky ego down a bit, and think of it as like, who's this for? Who can it work for? Who has this type of style that this might benefit? Because most rackets today, like if you go back 10, 15 years, you could have some real duds on the market. Like some rackets were not
Mm,
thought through. They were too stiff. There were no dampening. But nowadays, the rackets are all good, but it's not might not be for you. So you might still have to go through like 15 rackets to find the one that you like. But generally, like the quality is good. The feeling is quite good, because they been going so far in this kind of testing, and they know what they're doing. They have so much data built up now. And I did like the Solinco. Felt like the string bed was maybe a little bit lively for me, for my
yeah, me
game.
too. Yeah, to some
So I
degree.
couldn't really quite like. I'm very picky with
Gonna
the
pop
string
out.
bed, right? So if this, I feel like I don't know what's going on with my shots.
Yeah.
I need to feel like I'm making the mistake, not anything to do with the racket. I don't want to blame the racket for anything, because I know then it gets into my head and it's done, right? So
Right, right.
and that's one of those frames that felt nice, but I didn't quite trust it, and that was my problem with it, personally. But it's a good
No.
good stick. Like if you like the feeling and you feel like you can control the ball with it, then it's a great frame.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff, good stuff. So one interesting frame that I was funny, like I demoed it and I actually liked it. I thought it had a really good combination of certain properties, but then a lot of spin, like pretty good power, very maneuverable. But then I felt like my arm was gonna fall off. And then maybe you already know which one it is, but and then I actually saw a YouTuber say like this was one of the worst rackets like that has come out and whatnot. But I'm curious about your take on this one, because it seems like love and hate, like the Wilson Shift. Uh, what did you think about it?
Yeah, that I think it was very like a polarizing frame. If you look at other people, I
Yeah.
talked to a lot of the guys who also test rackets. I try not to look at too many reviews, not get influenced.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And I try to bring in other people on the review as well these days. So I try to always have like,
Smart.
okay, here's a few different guys with different styles, so we can all bring our opinions. I liked it. I thought it was very good. But some people struggle with the stiffness. I had no issues with stiffness, and I've had
Okay.
like in the
That's
past,
good.
if you're a play tester, you test a lot of rackets, your muscles never get used to you. Like your body is never used to what you're playing with, which is a bad thing. You never build up that muscle
Mhm.
memory. So the problem with the grip shape and the stiffness and everything starts being more magnified. So you're going to have some arm issues or wrist problems or whatever. But I didn't have
Yeah.
any problems with that. I thought they played great. They were a bit tricky to control, because the whole thing is like this vertical bending that they talk about from the Wilson
Right.
labs. Is that the despite even the Pro being 1820, which is quite dense pattern, right? And it's on a 99 square inch, so it's not a huge head size.
Yeah.
The racket still plays like an Aero. It's like super spinny. So it's like
Yeah.
it
Yeah. That's
is a
what I
bend,
loved. I love that.
And some people love that, and I
I
think
did.
it's a very good frame. And I if you haven't tried it, I would try it. Because it's very spinny, quite solid, and it looks great. It's just like an overall very solid frame. It was one of those rackets I thought like, okay, for bringing a new racket to the market, this was a clear thumbs up for me.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I just need to play around with the string and tension because, like, for some reason it was like harsh on my arm. But yeah.
Yeah, string.
Yeah.
I would say that like some rackets, it might sound weird, but some rackets are string sensitive. So some rackets they work really
Uh,
well with one type of string or one, not like just one brand and one stuff like, but like a certain type of string doesn't really gel with it,
mm,
or like if
mm,
you string them too high in the tension, you go up to 55 pounds, the racket gets kind of like too stiff and too much vibrations are happening. So
mm,
sometimes it's about like dialing when you found a racket you like, then you might have to dial in the string. Like maybe you have to go down in gauge, like a thinner gauge, or you have to have a thicker gauge. Depends, really. Like, but sometimes I also like since there's so much out there, and if you're able to test, if you don't gel with it, that like after 2 sessions and stuff, like it might be too much work, for you to actually like this racket. I usually think that the racket for you is one where you feel like boom after the first session you're like, wow, I love this. And then you might have a time where it's like a relationship, right? Like you lose that, it's a little bit it's not as sexy maybe after a few weeks,
right.
but then you get back to that after a while, right? So you have to kind of go through those periods, but you need to have the love at first hit kind of thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. You buy the racket, some new strings, and it's happy with you again. So I was trying to make some sort of stupid comparison, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a,
No.
it's a pretty good comparison. Like it
Yeah.
sounds weird, but I find like I usually talk about something called the honeymoon period, where you're like
Yeah.
you're in love and you're like, oh, I can't. This is every time I play with this racket, I'm so happy, but that will end at some point, and
For
harsh
sure.
reality will set in. And I have this. I have members on my Patreon. I talk to fellow tennis lovers all over the world every
Yeah.
day, and sometimes I get messages
Totally.
like, oh, and they're like, it's the best racket. I found the racket. I found the string. I'm playing my best tennis. I just won 3 matches.
Mm.
2 weeks later, I get a message. Do you know where to buy this racket? I'm like, what? You're in love with the other racket. This happened to me yesterday, right? So, uh, from a good
Nice.
player I know, and then he's like,
Nice.
oh, but now I want to buy this racket. I had some tough matches, and then like you have 3 losses or
Mm.
2 losses, and suddenly you're like
It's
throwing
the
this racket
racket.
in the garbage bin. So it's funny how fickle that is.
Yeah, yeah. Gotta take some responsibility. It's probably yourself, not the racket.
Yeah, yeah. Look
But
in the mirror. Like that's that's the
that's
that's the
right.
thing.
That's right. Usually my mirror cracks when I look into it, but it's another story. Anyways, in terms of like plush rackets, Jonas, like I think this is an important category because a lot of our audience is like 50 plus and like have been dealing with injuries and whatnot. So what lines would you recommend to these players who just want that plush, pillowy feeling, as you mentioned before?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the Clash is still one of those rackets. It's a hate love racket. It's also
Mm,
one of those I think you should try, but like a lot of players like it for a good reason. It's
okay.
soft on the arm, and it has like a nice give. And it's like if you like the pocketing, because it really pockets the ball, it's like the ball stays a long time on the string. Some people hate that. Some people love it. That's a
Mm,
little bit, how it is. It's not the easiest one to control always because that pocketing on the string, but results in like a trampoline effect. So the ball kind of
yeah.
sometimes trampolines a bit more than you had
Mm,
imagined. But for a like recreational, slightly older player maybe who has some arm issues, Clash should be on the demo list 100%. Then the rackets like, for example, the Prince Phantom series, very control oriented. Like you don't get quite as much power, but they're very nice on the arm and they're classy rackets. Um, a larger head size blade is another good one from Wilson that I think, like I have a friend who used to play ATP Tour, runs a club here
mm,
where I live, and he switched and he still plays hits with futures players, right? And he
mm.
switched to a Blade 104.
Oh wow,
And
like Serena,
that's a
right?
racket, like I like that a lot as well. I played some good tennis
Yeah.
with the 104,
Wow.
and it's very far from what I normally would play with. I play with a 95 usually, so 104 is a different orbit. But that's a very good stick. So I think sometimes you have to have a pretty open mind and say, okay, I want this. You should probably look a little bit at the stiffness rating. Sometimes a high stiffness rating could be a problem, but it doesn't tell the whole
Mm,
story.
okay.
So bigger blade, Clash is good. Bubble out rackets tend to be quite firm, so it's not the best brand. I mean, juniors love them. Heavy hitting players love them. I do also love some Babolats, but for like a, an older guy, maybe with some arm issues, or an older woman, I could be an issue, I would say, without
Mm,
giving too much shade on to them, right?
sure,
The
sure.
head boom series is quite arm friendly, I would say. That you give
Yeah.
some extra. So there's like lighter versions like Boom Team and stuff like that.
Mm,
So that works pretty well. Just pretty flush feeling. They have a little bit more give. So those frames, I would say, from the main manufacturers. There's some rackets that are not well known, like a Dunlop CX, which is the control line from Dunlop. They have
mm,
an oversized racket called the Dunlop CX 200 OS oversize, and that's a great frame. Like a lot of players who had some arm issues love that one. It gives them some control, but it's very very nice feeling sensation, and it's one of those like nobody talks about it, so that happens as well. Like there's some lines, some rackets just fly under the radar, and unless maybe a YouTuber or someone talks about it, it's like they don't sell them, they are just not marketed at all. So
right.
that would be one of those.
Right, right, right. So a couple follow-ups from that. First off, I remember trying the Dunlop. Is it the SX 300? Is that the one? Yeah. I actually thought that
Same,
was
yeah.
like pretty. It was pretty nice. Like it had a lot of the properties I liked. Maybe at the end, maybe I was overhitting a bit too much with it. But what was your experience with that racket?
Yeah, I liked it too. It was
Yeah,
it was very powerful. Like I also noticed like I
yeah,
was overhitting, but it was very fast and whippy. And sometimes you
yeah.
love that, like when you
I
can
love that.
really increase your swing speed and you just go for your shots like a maniac. That's
Yeah.
super fun. That's sometimes the fun stuff of different rackets is that some days you just want that like super plush feel. You can play some drop shots, move into the net. You play around with the ball, but sometimes you just want to whack the ball. Like you really want to like be like Rafa Nadal or a Alcaraz or whatever and go crazy. And it depends on your mood a bit that day and how good your body feels and so on. So the SX was good. I struggled a bit with control. The
Okay.
XX 300 Tour, which is the 98 range, is
Oh, the
something you
tour.
try.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Sorry, that's
that was
actually the one
pretty
I
whippy.
tried. Was that like better for you with the control? Like you like that more than the regular one,
Yeah, I
300?
think I like that one a little bit more, if I remember correctly. But I think I felt like at least the one I got because of quality control, sometimes the weight and balance they're usually a little bit off, within 7 ± 7 grams here and there. And that one I got was very light, so I needed to add some weight to it. Felt
Oh.
like a bit too whippy. Like you had good speed but no stability, like at some cases.
Mm.
But it depends a bit on the racket you actually hold in your hand, so you might need to customize it a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense, Jonas. In terms of like, because one thing I'm concerned about, like, I guess it seems like a lot of the racket lines are going towards more dampening, which I'm not sure if I'm going to like that. There were some that I tried that it was too dampened for me. But how do you do you counterbalance that with the different strings, and then like you think it's possible to do that, and then you'll like it? Like, what's an example of like doing that if you think that's a feasible way of making a racket that's more dampened, like to your liking?
It's a tough one because dampening it's a very strong matter of taste. Like some players can't play with dampened rackets. I'm not a huge fan of dampened rackets. Always I try everything and I can play with everything now with this crazy tennis lifestyle. But it's tough to kind of remove the dampening feel. What you can do
Mm,
sometimes is like have a hybrid, like a two different strings, and have like a natural gut or some very touchy feely string, and then
okay.
a round poly in the crosses or something. So you kind of create like a bit more of a
Mm,
connected feel. Like the gut, it has a very strong connection, and
mm.
it obviously holds tension well and so on. But the dampening, which is sometimes like technology in the handle, I think
The
Yonex maybe went a
VDM.
bit too far with the dampening of the recent rackets.
Damn it.
VDM, yeah, exactly, you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Some players love it in terms of comfort. It's usually a good idea, but like some old school players who we have a racket maybe from 15, 20 years, rackets were quite different than in terms of not like specifications, but in the terms of the dampening materials. Like I think what's the most modern thing I'm seeing now that I'm testing rackets that are not even out on the market yet is I'm seeing more and more dampening. I'm seeing like even more like of that. You don't quite like it feels good, but you're not sure where the ball is going 100%. Like so
Yeah.
that's something we're seeing, and it's not that easy, to if you don't like that, it's tough to kind of mitigate that feeling with the string.
Yeah. Just dampening my mood right now.
Yeah,
Sorry, that's a
sorry about that.
horrible dad joke. I love puns. That was so bad. Sorry. Um, yeah. Thanks for that. And then in terms of so you mentioned updates, right? I think you said like Pure Strike was one of them. is there and obviously I don't know how much like insider knowledge probably the most out of anyone I've ever interviewed, but like how which update are you most excited about, if any, like, and if any you could share, if not, no problem.
Yeah, I think the new blade from my brief hit was
Ooh.
very positive. So I think that was quite exciting. Did like the Pure Strike as well, but a little bit not like 100% my thing. But I only had like an hour or so with these rackets, so it's like it's hard to say 100%. But new models overall, like what I see from my numbers and from people is that the brands that make people excited and the lines in those brands, like it is like blades, everybody loves a blade. So if a new blade comes out,
Yeah.
people are going to be excited.
Yeah.
uh, Pure Strike is not the most exciting of the bubble up rackets, but since they only have 3 lines and it hasn't been updated in years, I think it's going to be
Yeah.
pretty interesting. And I think they are looking for some other ambassadors now, or like an extra ambassador, because Dominic Thiem has not been like uh, super impressive of recent years due to injuries
Yeah.
and so on. So
Yeah.
he's been struggling, and it's they obviously
Sad.
want some young, fresh face probably for it. So we'll see what happens there. So those lines are pretty exciting. There will be a new speed that I've been testing as well. So people who love the speed line can wait for that. It's a little bit different than the previous one. Yeah, those are the 3 ones that I think will create some interest, in the market. And it's also something I know, like I want to put a bit more extra time to, because people are just waiting for that. Like there's so many players using these types of rackets that,
Yeah.
oh, is the update worth it? Is one of the most common questions I get. Like, is it worth for me to spend, if you have 2 rackets, $600 to get 2 other rackets, two updated rackets, and it's not always the case that it's worth it. So those, I look forward to having more time with those frames. That would be good.
Awesome, man. Awesome. The blade, for example, like, uh, any big changes, or like, is it more maneuverable, spinny, or just, yeah? I mean, I think you mentioned that one had the biggest change, was it?
Yeah, it felt they all have they're all pretty slight changes for most people, I would say.
Okay.
But from what I can tell, it's like it had like a positive, felt a bit more solid, a little bit more power.
Hmm.
I think people generally these days like a bit more power overall. I think that's where the game is going with the modern game is even on the playing level. Like people have a little bit more from the racket. The
Yeah.
strings help the ball go in, even if they look like it's going out. With the polyesters, which is
Yeah.
probably a bigger innovation than the rackets. So even on the rec level, like tennis is a bit faster, I would say, and most people are using polyester whether they should or not. So I think we're gonna see a bit more dampened power overall, like more better dampening, but also like trying to have a bit more power back. It ebbs and flows. Like sometimes it's like, oh, the trend is control, then the trend goes to power, then the trend goes to dampening, then it kind of goes back and forth in circles.
Yeah. Gotcha. In terms of the blade, because it's such a popular racket, I know a lot of players use that. My mixed doubles partner uses that, and I actually love. To be honest, I loved it. Like, especially the 1820. Like, oh man, for me, my volleys felt so amazing, and like the feel was incredible. But it just wasn't quite like a spin. It didn't have enough spin for me. Like even the 1619. But that one, yeah. I mean, how would you categorize that racket? Like, it wouldn't be a spin one, would it? Be more control, I guess.
The interesting thing with the blade is such a popular frame, but it's still one of those that is like, I see a lot of people maybe who shouldn't be using the blade use the blade, and I think
Yeah.
it's a great frame. Like I always loved it
Right.
since they started releasing it. Like it started with the M blade many years ago,
Yeah.
and it's one of those lines that is popular for a reason, and a lot of pros use it because you get control, and the pros need a lot of control usually.
Mhm.
But for many players, they are not quite as forgiving and not spinny enough. I mean, for example, a 1619 blade is not a spin racket, as you alluded to. It's a control frame, but
Yeah.
it has a bit more forgiveness and a bit more spin potential than the 1820. Because when you have like 1820 is obviously more strings than 1619. So you're also going to have a heavier racket to swing with. That's good to keep in mind. Like if you're buying an 1820 version, it's not only more controlled and with a lower trajectory, but it's also going to have more strings, which means higher swing weight.
Mm.
So it's going to be more demanding to play with. The 1820 is always more demanding if you have two patterns to choose from. So good to keep that in mind. But yeah, the blade is not like it's for you who are really like a modern control player. And
Mm.
I think sometimes you see blades in the hands of players that would benefit from even like okay, if you want to stay blade, you go blade 104 or blade 100. Those are good, not super powerful, but a lot easier to play with than the
Mm.
98, because a 98 is a control frame in today's market. That's just how it is.
Yeah, true that, true that. Jonas, what are your top three control rackets? Because we talked about, well, we didn't do power either, but yeah, what are your top three control, and then maybe you can give us your top three power as well.
Yeah, it's tough. Like I think since I try everything, I mean, Blade is one of those. I would say that's modern rackets is like at the top. I would say it's like that. That's the the one where most brands want to imitate. They want to have a blade in their lineup. Like
Yeah.
Radical is also there, similar
Okay.
on par ish. So the Blade and Radical are best sellers for a reason. The other brands, they don't quite have like the Blade and the Radical in their lineup. They mean like you mentioned the Solinco Whiteout. That's a good one. Wouldn't be top three maybe.
Okay.
Technifiber TF40 is another
Mm.
one where that's in that range where racket I really like. Very good frame. That's kind of like it's controlled. It's not as extreme as Prestige and Pro stuff. That's like as controlled as you get. But I think for
Mm.
most people, that's not the frame to get. I would say, unless you're like a
Right.
connoisseur or you like the paint job, or because the Pro Staff 97, if we talk about that from Wilson, it's a 315-gram, quite heavy racket,
Mm.
small sweet spot, very nice to play with if you're a good player. But for most people, I think the Blade is the better choice because it helps you a bit more, just a bit more. So Blade Radical, and then the third one, yeah, maybe would be the Technifiber TF40, but just like off the cuff here. I did like the
Yeah.
Percept from Yonex as well. Very good
Mm.
frame, Percept 97. So yeah, out of the three ones, I'll probably go with those. Yeah, that's a
Beautiful.
very nice choice. Even if it's 97, thanks to the isometric head shape, which is a bit flatter, it plays a bit bigger than that.
Nice, nice, nice. Good, great choices there. And then for power, I'm gonna guess one and say the Pure Drive. I don't know if is that your, but give me your top three. But I would just wanted to see if you agree.
Yeah, that's it has to be up there. I'm not always super in love with pure. I love older Pure Drives a bit more. This is my personal
Yeah.
taste. I think it's a good racket. I think a lot of people love the Pure Drive. I have friends who play with it. It was a bit firm for my liking. I hope the new Pure Drive will be a good one. I'm really looking forward to testing that when that happens. Not exactly sure when that's going to happen. Sometimes the racket companies are very open with their like plans, and I'm not sharing with my audience because I want to have a good relationship with them. So we play ball.
Sure.
If they want to have a planned campaign, you don't want to ruin it for them. I think that's a bit silly. So
Oh, for sure.
uh,
For
yeah,
sure.
but I don't really know when that's coming out. But the Pure Drive is good. But my favorite is the E-Zone 100. It's a
Ooh.
very good power frame. I just my personal liking, and the reason I think is that it has a little bit denser pattern. So on flatter shots, which a lot of people have flatter shots, if like especially if you're been in the game for a while, it performs a bit better with control, in aspect of control. So I really like the E-Zone 100. That would be my favorite one. Pure Dove is up there in the top three for sure,
Okay.
somewhere, because it's still a good frame. Just stiffness can be a bit of an issue where the Yonex is a bit more dampened. And a little bit of a sleeper racket in the power category is the Dunlop FX 500. It's a very good frame that I can recommend. So I mean, Dunlop, they're not like as well known as the Yonex,
Mhm.
Head, Babula, and Wilson, but they do make good rackets. So it should be on someone's list. And
Yeah.
the Ultra was pretty good as well. The Ultra V4 that they released, I think, a year ago or so. So that's probably four rackets. But that's like the big brands. They do make good products, especially these days. So like you're pretty. It's a pretty safe bet to go with like a name brand. I mean, I like to promote smaller brands because they make some good products, especially strings, whether it's rackets or apparel. But the big brands nowadays, they don't make like really like a super bad frame. You're not gonna get that. So if you want, if you know that it's like, if you get a bobble frame, it's gonna be like a bobble feel. So if you, for example, you like bobble rackets, I'm sure you're gonna be happy with the new bobble. Or same with Wilson, same with Head. That they still have their distinctive feel no matter what line of them you use, right?
Yeah, I feel like for me in the end, I might have to just do the Pure Aero 98 and just like get used to it. For me, it's like a little bit more, I don't know if to say plasticky is right the word
Yeah,
than the
yeah. I
Pure
think that's
Storm, but
what I get from. I think the people who don't like it, they've said that it feels like sometimes the funny thing with rackets is that just the cosmetic or just the feeling when you hold it in the hand makes a difference. So when you impact the ball, you might not look at like feel plastic, whatever. It's not, but it's
Yeah.
just that whole experience with the frame visually, touch and feel with the holding it in the hand. Maybe if you have a one-hander or two-hander.
Two-hander.
Two-hander, yeah. So like for some people, like you just when you have a one-hander, for example, you take the racket back, holding it in the throat, and then if the throat feels weird, you
Mm,
can't hit your one-handed backhand. So it's a small thing that actually plays a big role in the whole choice. So yeah, I've heard that it's people. So maybe you should have tried the previous one, the VS, which is tough to
yeah.
find, but that feels more, I would say, a little bit more like typical graphite, shiny,
Mm,
glossy finish. Not doesn't look so. I would, you can talk about what you want about the cosmetic of the new arrows. I could have imagined something better, but it's not horrible. But it's like it has a certain like younger demographic. That's
right, right.
that's good to keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. One other thing about rackets. So you mentioned that like the certain ratings, like let's say the stiffness, like it doesn't tell the whole story. I mean, one aspect too that I was wanted to see if we could explain for viewers, you could explain, is like the head, headlights points, head heavy, like the points, like what does that correlate to, and does that also tell like the whole story about a particular trait?
Yeah, it's when on the broad like line of specifications, because I think like when people are browsing rackets on their favorite retailer website, whatever, they
Yeah.
look at the specifications and they have head size. That's how big the head size is. That's not so complicated. String
Yeah.
pattern, obviously, 16-18, quite open pattern, fewer strings, 18-20, denser pattern, more control. Those are pretty basic. But when it comes to like weight and balance, the balance point, if it's head light, it means like the racket head, like the hoop of the racket, doesn't, it's the weight is more centered towards the handle. Like head light means that it's like handle heavy. So that can be a bit counterintuitive for some, I guess. But it's like, okay, it's lighter in the head than when you balance the racket on your finger, for example. So if you get like some players struggle with having too much weight in the head,
Mm,
like because it makes the racket swing slower. So one of the things that are affected by where the racket weight is placed is swing weight, and that's one of the most important things. I like to stress it a bit because I think the racket brands don't put enough attention on it, because swing weight is how heavy the racket is when you swing it through the air. And that's what's the most important factor when you, for example, want to have two identical rackets. So if weight and balance can be the same on three rackets, but they all have three different swing weights, so they all swing differently. So when you swing a racket through the air, that's where you want to have, this feels the same like my other racket. But if you buy two rackets without getting a matching service, which some retailers offer, they can feel completely different and play completely different. So with the balance and the weight, those are important. But the swing weight, I would say, is the most important specification of the racket that you can look at. And you can also adjust balance. So for example, if you have a racket that feels very heavy towards the head and you don't like it, you can actually add like something in the handle. It could be blue tack, it could be silicone, like
mm,
regular silicone you buy in like a hardware store, or you can actually wrap like lead tape around the handle, the top of the handle maybe, to get the weight more towards the handle. That's not going to affect the overall swing weight, and it's going to make the racket swing a bit faster, feel a bit whippier if you like that.
nice.
Opposite, if a racket feels very flimsy, like you're swinging it, feels like all the weight is in the handle, you can add weight in the hoop of the racket so it feels a little bit more solid and it gives you a bit more power and stability. Like sometimes I get rackets for test even that are so off in specification that to even play the frame properly, I need to do something to it. I always try it as is, but I also then test it if I customize it a bit to where it would be more on the average specification.
Jonas, great stuff. So, in terms of the strings, I have a similar question for you as well as like the process, part of it. So, what steps would you take to find the ideal string for your game?
Yeah, that's also, I mean, it always starts with who you are. And I would say, like, if you're a player with arm issues, should take this step quite seriously because the string makes a big difference. You can make a racket pretty comfortable, even if it's a relatively stiff racket, meaning like that when a stiff racket, you get rapid vibrations from the frame. It doesn't absorb the vibrations and it can go down to your arm, and then you cause like tennis elbow in with kind of the easiest way to explain it. So a lot of players could benefit from playing with a multi-filament string. And a multi-filament is a soft string that has several filaments. That's from the name multi-filaments. It's like more complex string that you can have in your racket pretty much until it breaks. Most players will not break a polyester string, which is the most common on the market these days. That's what most people use. But average recreational player will most likely not break it unless they hit like really off center, or it has, there's like some part of the string hole grommet that is like a little bit sharp, and then it, snaps from that.
Yeah.
While pros who hit with a lot of spin and heavy speeds, they can break strings after 1 hour. Like they string a racket and they break in one practice. So they have to bring like 4 rackets to a practice, which sounds a little bit insane if you're not into tennis, but that's how it is, right? So for players with arm issues, I would definitely try to go for a multi-filament string. And there are many good ones on the market. Pay a little bit more, you're going to get better playability and feel overall. Technifiber makes some really good ones. Obviously, the main brands, they do as well. But a multi-filament, you can just play it until it breaks. While with a polyester, which is a firmer string, feels a bit more plasticky. There's loads of them, shaped, non-shaped, round, whatever. That one, it starts to lose its elasticity after a certain playing period, depending on how hard you hit and how often you play and so on.
Right.
And when it loses its elasticity, you don't get the benefits of the string anymore. And the string is usually, you call it dead. You can argue that it's not that, it's like it's just too elastic, or there are, people get very technical, but it starts to lose that sensation where the string snaps back into place, because that's what the poly does. It's like starts here, hit the ball, goes like to the sides, and then snaps back after the impact of the ball. And that's how the spin helps you. So it's like, if it's faster snapback, the ball takes more of a shape from the racket and gets the extra RPMs on the ball. So for spin players, there's not really any option. You need to play with a polyester string.
Okay.
But there are soft polys, there are stiff polys, there are polys that have a lot of give. There are different colors. The color makes a difference. So you can have the same brand, same gauge, which is the thickness, and one yellow and one black, and the black plays a lot more control than the yellow one, where the yellow one plays more lively. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration. I would say, but arm issues is the most important part to consider. And if you're a spin player, you would probably want a bit more of a controlled string, because you're already playing with so much racket head speed. While if you're a flat player, you probably want to go with maybe a thinner gauge, and you don't have to have such a super controlled string, because you're already hitting it so flat. So you don't really need that extra, snapback and so on. So there are a lot of things to take into consideration, but those are some kind of key guidelines, I would say.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. Yeah, because I was going to ask you about, if I were to switch from poly to multi-filament, like what would I experience? But it sounds like I would experience like less spin, and then maybe more power. Is there anything else?
Yeah. No, I think that the problem for a lot of players, even I tried this. I use everyone as my experiment, kind of. I'm like, hey, I give you a string. If you're maybe a beginner, and if I have beginners where there's a group of players coming to Marbella or whatever, and I'm like, okay, try this racket, and it's a multi-filament racket, and it could be a player who has played tennis maybe 50 times in their life, or 30 times, whatever it is, and a lot of people don't still like the multi-filament, even though it's better for them, because it doesn't have the snapback, so it doesn't give you that nice extra spin potential, but it does give you power, and it does give you comfort. So it does make the racket feel a bit more like a pillow, which some people love, and that's a nice sensation. And if you're unsure, you can always try to have one multi-filament in the mains, which is the main kind of string, and one polyester in the crosses. So you get a bit of mix of both worlds. Something I tend to go with a lot in certain rackets, because I do like this softer feel. You see a lot of pros use natural gut in the mains. You have Novak doing it. And my friend Roman Safiulin is now testing natural gut in his racket. So
cool.
I talked to him yesterday about it, So a lot of pros are more open to testing things now and adding gut to get a bit more power, a bit more softer feeling, and so on.
That's really cool. You're friends with Sifulin. That's awesome. Yeah. In terms of let's see, the if you want to accentuate, let's say you want to have more spin, and you're doing a hybrid. So should you put that string, the poly in the main? Is it that whatever is in the main gives you more Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would put the poly in the main. That's also like I'm sometimes a matter of taste and style. Like Novak, for example, plays. I wouldn't say he plays flat, but he plays a lot more on the margins, right? So
Yeah.
he plays with very high tension, for
Mm.
most people, I would say, and but he uses the gut in the mains because it kind of suits his style, which is a little bit flatter, more through the court. All his shots, if you sometimes go to his practices, he lives in the same area as I do, so there
Whoa.
every shot he hits looks like it's like 5 millimeters from the baseline. It's crazy, how you have this precision. You can understand why he dominates sometimes because I've never seen anyone like just have that kind of depth control like that he has. It's just amazing.
Mm.
But he has the gut in the mains. But then you can have players who are maybe more spin oriented, but they want a softer feeling. They maybe put the gut in the crosses where it has a little bit less impact on the string bed. So for
Mm.
you, or if you're a top spin player and you want to try gut or you want to try a multi-filament just to soften up the string bed a bit, put
Mm.
it in the crosses, and you get some of that benefit, but it's not the dominating string. The dominating string is the main string.
Gotcha. Thanks, Jonas. Speaking of dominating strings, Hyper-G seems to be one that is, very prevalent, and I think a lot of college players use it, and it's just, yeah, I don't know, it's been very popular. I use it myself actually, but I guess first off, how would you categorize Hyper-G, and then also, are there any alternatives that you have found as well that you think can be quite good instead?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Hyper-G. Always was since it came out. It's been like also one of those strings that capture people's attention because it's lime green, like a neon green, so it stands out, which was a
Yeah,
very smart move, I think, because like
really
you
smart.
can see the string. It also works with different. I mean, I don't know how picky some people are, but if the racket is yellow, or you can't have a yellow string, it looks really strange, right? Usually,
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing that unless you love yellow. But that string is a spin oriented, relatively firm, I would say. I would say medium firmness, pretty firm string. So arm issues, you need to go very low. I would not play with it with arm issues. There
Mm.
is Hyper-G Soft, which I played with yesterday,
Mm.
and that has a little bit softer feel. But when you have a softer string, it drops tension quicker. And Hyper-G
Yeah.
Soft is one of those strings that drop the tension. But Hyper-G is a semi lively, like pretty. There's a lot of action going in the string. It has a nice like snapback. It gives you a lot of spin. If you like that feeling, it's a very addictive string to play with. I always liked it due to that. But there are like options. For example, Headlinks Tour
Mm.
is a string that is very similar, maybe a tad firmer depending on the colorway you go for. But it's one of my favorites. A lot of pros use that now, making the switch to that string. That's also a great string. So those two strings have that kind of like firm, spinny feeling. If you want something that gives you some spin, but it's a little bit softer, like Yonex Polytour strings are pretty good. So there's the Polytour Rev, which is their spinnier string. That's a pretty good
Mm.
one. That is not as stiff, on the arm.
Mm. Mm.
So the choice of strings is like it's crazy now. Like it's hard to keep up, even for me with my weird tennis lifestyle. Like it's tough to keep up with all the new strings hitting the market all the time and new brands, because the string market has this like it's an lower entry. That's like when you to develop a racket, that's a completely different ballpark. To develop a racket, it's going to require some money. It's going to require a lot of iteration, while a string is easier.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And then I do want to just get into your podcast a little bit, at least. Any particular guests that come to mind, and like really great pieces of advice that you've kind of taken with you from them?
I've been fortunate enough to have some interesting guests. Some of them are repeat guests, so I would probably single them out. It's like I have Nikola Racic, who's a
Yeah,
pretty
he's
famous
great.
YouTube coach, great guy, loves tennis. I think his tennis passion is addictive, and we sometimes talk on the phone as well. And he's like, we can keep talking about tennis for hours. It's pretty funny because he has such a wide knowledge, and some of
Yeah.
his tips or ideas are not always something I agree with, but I always respect his opinion, and I think he's a lots of interesting ideas, and his passion shines through, and he's a nice guy. So I would say, like, if you want to listen to those episodes, I think you'll find something. Well, once we did a 4-hour podcast, I was a bit
Whoa,
tired after that
sweet.
one.
Yeah, have a beer
I think
after
I
that.
published like 2.5 hours of it because it had some technical stuff, but it was, yeah, we
All
can talk
right.
about tennis. It goes nuts. Probably
Awesome.
bore people to death, but and
No, no.
Carousel, it's another friend of mine that he's been on my podcast twice. Good player now.
Yeah.
He's back on the tour, so that's always interesting. and he's very open. I like people who are very open and honest and don't try to kind of hold back on certain topics. I always
Yeah.
try to be as blunt without hurting people, kind of. You want to be like you have nothing to hide, which is, I think, is a good way to live life. And he does it that way, and understands tennis well and has his strong opinions, and it's interesting to hear his thoughts about being a pro, for example. Like there's been some, even like an episode I did with Simon Konov from Top Tennis Training, another
Nice.
YouTuber. He talked about like the rough life on the pro tour. I think opened a lot of people's eyes on how,
Mm.
like, sleep in like a bus shelter and stuff like this while you're playing futures. That was
Holy
one of the
crap.
parts of the episode. And then you realize, like, okay, life of a tennis pro on the
Wow.
lower rungs of the tour it's pretty tough. It's a grind.
Jesus.
So kudos to people who really tough it out and make it, or people who just try it, because it does require like a lot of will to go through that.
Yeah, wow, that's rough. Yeah, I love all those guys you mentioned. Been lucky enough to make content with them as well. So, very cool. Shoot, there's one question I wanted to ask about the racket brand, just to give a shout out. To maybe like the most underrated racket brand, like a brand that isn't mentioned much, isn't in those top few that we've talked about. Most of the episode, but like that you like, and you can mention multiple if you want.
Yeah, usually you open up Pandora's box, kind of. No, but it's like, yeah, for example, like a US based brand that nobody knows about, but I actually liked a lot, was the Fury brand, like based in New
Yeah,
York.
they're awesome.
I mean, obviously, all brands are, most rackets are made in China, like Yonex excluded, with the made in Japan. But I would say those rackets, like the Fury Arma Pro 98, my father still uses them. I gave them to him. I really like them too, but he liked them more. So, and I have too many rackets, so I gave them to him, and he loves them. And I force people I play with to try rackets, even against their will. I hold a gun and hey, we have to try this.
What a savage.
Yeah. That's
That's
usually
funny.
because my bag is always like 6 to 8 rackets, new rackets, and
Yeah.
if I play with someone who's coming here to visit me in Spain, or just, I mean, sometimes it's tennis blind dates. You probably have the same. Like tennis can be a blind date. You'll never seen the guy, you just chatted, and then like, yeah, now you're playing, and that's
Yeah.
nice. And there's always some racket, and some people are very reluctant to testing because they know, like, okay, if I test, maybe I like it, and I have to buy it. It's not good, so I stick to mine. And then
Yeah.
I don't push too hard. But the Fury is good. Angel makes some good rackets. I reviewed their React
Oh,
series. They're not that
oh,
famous, and they also custom, like, so you can get your own specifications, which is pretty cool. They have a custom program. What else is there? There's a few brands that are like, flying a little bit under the radar. You mentioned Solinco is now famous for strings, but the rackets are good as well.
yeah.
People don't really know that they make rackets, which is interesting. Uh,
True.
for example, like Technifiber, people don't think about, even though there's like Medvedev playing with it, Iga Swiatek, so many top pros like are using Technifiber. But when you ask a regular club player, they will know Babula Wilson, Yonex. Maybe now Yonex are picking up steam, and
They
and
are. Yeah.
uh, and Head, but there's so many brands that actually create really good products. So you can always look outside the well-known brands as well, and you might find some. Maybe you want to be a guy who shows up with something that nobody else has. It's always fun, to be that guy, right?
That's right. Yeah. Be unique fellow. I remember when I was young, like I didn't want an Apple product, and I got some random one, but it broke, and then I was like, damn, maybe I should have just got Apple. But yeah, that was a while ago. Jonas, any particular just projects or like anything you want us to check out that you might be doing coming down the pike?
I mean, there's always stuff happening. More stuff always on tennisnerd.net, so that's where the people can check out. Like, we do more news now. I have a guy helping me a bit, like trying to do a bit more wide ranging content, because even it sounds like I'm insane, but I also get bored with the rackets, like, because I need to do other.
Uh,
I go to a lot of tournaments during the year, not a lot, but maybe 5-6 ATP tournaments during a year. And
nice.
I do like hanging around, like watching a lot of tennis, talking tennis. That's why I had the podcast. So I think
Yeah.
people sometimes go like, "Oh yeah, this is the gear, dude. It's gear," and it's like, "Oh, it's nice to talk about something else than gear." I always like talking about gear, but it's like when it becomes when the kind of a passion becomes your job, you always look for a little bit like, okay, it's good to get a breather from other stuff,
Mm.
even if it's tennis. So yeah, tennisnerd.net is good to check out. Like, if you want, please follow me on YouTube, trying to get the 50K mark. I don't know the social media game well enough. I noticed that the younger guys do a much better job than I do, so it's tough to keep growing. But I'll do it because I enjoy it. So that's really the thing, you know.
Awesome, man. Do you also talk about like how to improve your game as well? Like I forgot if you were you an instructor at one point too, or no?
We did an app that's still around. Me and Nicky. Nicky is a friend of mine who used to play pro
Oh,
while back. Now he plays more football than tennis, but he's still a very good coach. So we did like an app with a lot of videos. He's been on my YouTube channel. A lot of people like Nicky. Nicky actually runs a company called Unstrung Custom where he paints rackets. So if you want your racket painted
oh,
in whatever idea you have, he can get it done. He's done it for Elton John, for example. So he has some famous customers,
damn.
um, but yeah, so that's cool. And we've done some coaching content together. You know, we do play from time to time. He joins my reviews, but he's very picky about rackets, so he usually thinks it's shit until he starts playing with it, and then I can get to convince him. He's like, "Ah, it's crap. I'm not gonna try it." And then I force
Okay.
him. He's like, "Okay, well, it's actually quite good." I have to admit, you know.
Yeah, open his eyes. Yeah,
So
yeah.
so yeah, so we have some coaching content. Like I sometimes help him coach. Like, you know, I'm not a player that can coach very good players, but I can coach like intermediate players, beginners. Sometimes we have people coming to Marbella and Spain, and I help out, you know, and try to. I always like being on a tennis court. You know, it's something I always enjoy. I wouldn't want to be with, you know, students for 8 hours maybe,
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because I want to play myself and get
Test
my old
rackets.
body some exercise. But otherwise, yeah, it's always fun to be on a court, whatever you do.
Love it. Yeah. Hell yeah. I definitely agree with that. And then any social media, I know you mentioned it, but like, do you any profiles you want us to check out as well?
Yeah, Instagram. I try to put like a lot of effort recently. Seems like be like a platform where people communicate. I don't know what's your experience there, but you know, when I look at the different platforms, sometimes I gel more with some and not others. Like TikTok, I don't understand at all.
Hmm.
I've been open with that. Instagram, I like. It's more of a community feeling. You know, that seems to work pretty well.
Yeah.
Facebook, I feel it's like I feels like older people than me. I don't know. It's like it's not. Yeah, but I have the group that is going strong. So if you want to buy, sell, maybe you put that link in the show notes.
Yeah.
But like the easiest way to interact, where I get a lot of like advice, where some talk to some pros here and there, it's the Instagram. I think Tennisnerd Insta, where it's easiest to kind of reach out. I would say follow what's
Awesome.
going on.
Awesome, awesome, love it. I think we could also talk for a couple more hours at least, but really enjoyed it, Jonas. I know you got stuff to do, so yeah, I'll just ask you, this question I ask all my guests, which is, and you can cater to gear and whatnot if you want. You don't have to, but what is one piece of advice that you can tell our audience to help them improve their tennis games?
Oh yeah, that has to be something with gear, and
Yeah,
yeah, I would say that's one piece of advice. It's a tough question actually. Give me
yeah.
4 hours. No, no, no.
I mean, you can do multiple if you want. What up to you?
Yeah, yeah. No, I would say like that for my audience, which something comes up all the time. I think it's pretty good advice. Is try not to get stuck in the gear jungle. Like that's probably because a lot of people, you are in it now. I've been in it for 15 years. I don't know, and it's like if you can avoid it to start testing rackets, although it's fun, it's gonna be pretty detrimental to your tennis to keep testing. So I would
Hmm.
recommend you to try to be like quite strict with yourself. Maybe allow like, okay, I test 4 rackets, I go for one, and then I don't test any rackets for a year. You know, so put some strict guidelines. This is very specific advice, but I think if you really want to play good tennis, getting into the racket game and the string game can be pretty detrimental, although it's fun. So I just wanted to give that warning out as a kind of a little bit of a disclaimer. Like don't get stuck in it because it can be quite addictive, although it's not as bad as some things that are addictive. It can be a long road.
Yeah, exactly. Great stuff. So yeah, I mean, rewind, go, listen again to like the process that Jonas outlined when we
Yeah.
more in the beginning of the show, and then pick it, and then just use it for at least a few years. Great stuff. Well, everybody definitely check out tennisnerd.net and then the YouTube channel, Instagram. We'll have all the links in the on the show notes page and in the app, whatever app you use to listen to the show. So, thank you very much, Jonas. Appreciate the time, and hope to chat with you again soon. And keep up the great work.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. And yeah, I will keep listening. And if you you want me on again, I'm here. So let me know.
Awesome. Would love to do it. Thanks, man.
Cool.